My husband threw tantrums for months, smashed a jar of sauce by hitting it so hard, flipped the coffee table over, and his mother just said, "Boys are like that." So I decided to pay him back in the same coin, only much harder. Hey everyone, before we get into today's story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and leave a comment down below. Your support really helps the channel grow, and lets me know you enjoy this kind of content. I married Nathan after 2 years of dating, and everything was great until we started living together. Our duplex was lovely, the kitchen was huge, and there was even a backyard where I grew tomatoes and peppers. Nathan worked from home as a consultant, and I went every day to the veterinary clinic downtown. We split everything evenly. Each of us was responsible for dinner on alternating days. Life was calm. That is, until about 3 months after the wedding, when I discovered the real Nathan. At a supermarket, I picked up the wrong sauce, and he, on impulse, ripped the jar out of my hand and slammed it so hard against the shelf that it cracked, right in front of an employee. He complained that the sauce had too much sugar and walked away as if nothing had happened. I bought it anyway because I needed it to cook. At home, when he saw the jar in the groceries, he threw it straight into the trash. He made himself a snack, went to his office, and from that day on, the outburst never stopped. If I got the coffee creamer wrong, he would pour it all down the sink right in front of me. If I forgot to record his show, he would unplug the TV and take it to the garage. If dinner was late, he would empty the cabinet of pots and stack them all on the counter. The worst was the day I came home late because of an emergency at the clinic. Nathan threw all the pillows and blankets into the bathtub and turned on the shower. He said, "If you can't get home on time, you don't deserve a comfortable bed." I slept on the couch while he sprawled out on the king-size bed. My friend Lisa kept telling me to get out of it, but I wanted to try to fix things on my own. Nathan had a ritual. He would make a scene, lock himself in the office, and after an hour come back as if nothing had happened, asking what was for dinner or if I wanted to watch a movie. If I brought it up, he said I was too sensitive and exaggerated everything. Once I tried to talk calmly. He threw a coffee mug against the wall. It didn't hit me, but it scared me. He even had the nerve to say, "You're being dramatic over a little noise." His mother came to visit. I tried to explain what was going on. She saw Nathan flip the coffee table because I forgot to buy protein bars and just said, "Boys are like that." Yes, she really said that. And she even told me that her husband used to break plates when he got angry, and that my role was to keep Nathan happy. That's when I understood. No one was going to fix this for me. So I started responding at the same level. If Nathan threw the remote control against the wall because the game froze, I grabbed his headset and threw it into the yard. He spent an hour looking for it in the dark. When he threw away my expensive shampoo because I took too long in the shower, I took all his supplements and whey protein and dumped them into the kitchen trash. He had to dig through the garbage to get them back, getting covered in coffee grounds and food. When he pushed my makeup off the counter because I left a strand of hair in the sink, I went into his office and threw everything off his desk onto the floor. The laptop survived, but coffee flew everywhere. Nathan was stunned. During his outbursts, he expected me to clean up or apologize. But now I was doing worse. He threw one book at the door, I threw 3. He slammed doors, I slammed them harder. He started yelling that I was crazy, out of control. I yelled back that I was just expressing my feelings, exactly like he did. Then came the peak. Nathan's boss called for an important meeting. He was in the office and I was in the kitchen making lunch. I accidentally dropped a pan, and he came at me furious, complaining about the noise. So I grabbed all the pots in the house and started dropping them one by one. Nathan's face turned red, creeping up into his hairline. On the laptop screen, I could see his boss, Winston, frozen in the middle of the call, asking what was going on. Nathan slammed the computer shut so hard I thought it would break. He came toward me with clenched fists. For a second, I thought about backing down, apologizing, doing anything to calm him, like always. But I was still holding the cast iron skillet, and in that moment, something inside me told me not to move. Nathan stopped less than a meter away from me, staring, breathing heavily through his nose. I saw a different look, almost fear, as if he finally realized that this time I wasn't going to back down. He even opened his mouth to scream, but nothing came out. Suddenly, he turned and punched the hallway wall so hard that his hand went straight through the drywall. The noise was horrible. He shook his hand, groaning, went straight into the office, and slammed the door so hard the house shook. I heard him locking it from the kitchen. I put the pan down and noticed my hands were shaking. I looked at the kitchen, the pots scattered everywhere. It looked like an obstacle course. I started picking them up and putting them away, my heart racing. I could hear him in the office, talking on the phone in a high-pitched, desperate voice, completely unlike anything I had ever heard from him. I listened. I pressed my ear against the door. He was saying I had lost my mind, that I had deliberately ruined his important meeting, that he didn't know what to do with me anymore. Then I realized he was talking to his mother. He kept repeating, "She's out of control. This can't go on. You need to come here." I stepped away and sat on the couch. I picked up my phone from the coffee table and opened my photos. Without even realizing it, I had been photographing everything Nathan had destroyed over the past few months. There was the cracked sauce jar, the soaked bedding in the bathtub, my makeup scattered across the bathroom floor, The mark on the wall from the mug, the broken remote control, the empty shampoo bottle in the sink. There were dozens of photos documenting every one of his outbursts. Less than an hour later, I heard the sound of a key turning in the front door. Nathan had definitely given his mother a key without even consulting me, because Laura walked in as if the apartment were hers. She didn't knock. She just appeared in the living room where I was still sitting on the couch, arms crossed, staring at me like I was a misbehaving child. She launched into a speech about how a real wife respects her husband's work time, does everything she can to keep a peaceful home environment, and acts like a partner, not someone who only causes problems. She said Nathan had big responsibilities, and that I needed to understand that my behavior was harming his career. I listened to her talk nonstop until I grabbed my phone and showed her the photos, one by one. The cracked sauce jar, the soaked bedding, my makeup scattered, the hole in the wall, the empty bottles. She grew quieter with each image. Her face tightened as if she had bitten into a lemon. At the last photo, she handed my phone back and said, "You both need to grow up. Not just Nathan, both of us," as if I were equally responsible for the chaos we were living in. The office door opened and Nathan came out, disheveled, looking like he hadn't slept at all. He and Laura went into the kitchen and started whispering, but the apartment is so small that I could hear everything from the living room. I heard her say that he needed to deal with me. Just hearing that made my stomach churn. Nathan said I had changed, that I used to be sweet and easy to deal with, and now I was unbearable. Not a word about his own behavior, or about the fact that he had been throwing fits for months before I ever started reacting. Laura even said that marriage is hard, that both people have to give in, but then added that sometimes a man needs to be firm with his wife. At that moment, I wanted to get up and throw something at both of them, but I just stayed there, gripping the arm of the couch so hard my fingers turned white. When Laura left, Nathan sat on the other end of the couch, and the silence between us felt like something alive, heavy. I stared at the clock on the wall, watching time pass, 1 minute after another, until hours went by. No one said anything, because what was left to say after everything? We were long past the point of talking like a normal couple. There was no way to talk about feelings or try to fix things anymore. We had spent months dumping rage on each other, destroying things, throwing objects. The silence was suffocating. Nathan cleared his throat from time to time, as if he were about to say something, but then he would fall silent again and shift his position. I looked at the hole in the wall and thought about what I would tell the landlord, not to mention the money lost and the exhaustion. I was so tired of living like that. Later, Nathan grabbed a pillow and a blanket and went to sleep in the office. I went to the bedroom, lay down, and couldn't fall asleep. I stared at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had happened. I had started acting like him, thinking that was how I defended myself, that I wouldn't let anyone walk all over me. But lying there in the dark, I realized that fighting back hadn't solved anything. It only showed me that I, too, was capable of being destructive. We had both turned our home into a war zone. The duplex that once felt like a home had become enemy territory. The tomatoes and peppers in the backyard were probably dying, because I hadn't taken care of the plants in a long time. Everything we had built was falling apart, and I no longer knew what to do to stop it. I thought fighting back would make Nathan see how bad his behavior was, but in the end, all I did was give him ammunition to say that I was crazy too. I ended up falling asleep around 3 a.m., from the exhaustion of someone who simply couldn't take it anymore. The next day, I woke up to the smell of coffee. I went into the kitchen and found Nathan standing by the coffee maker with that fake smile on his face. He asked what I wanted for breakfast, cheerful, as if nothing had happened. I stared at him, trying to understand what was going on. I said we needed to talk about everything. The fights, the destruction, his mother coming into our house without warning. His smile widened, became even more forced, and he replied that there was nothing to talk about, that I just needed to stop exaggerating. He said we could go back to normal if I stayed calm and stopped creating problems where there were none. At that moment, something inside me broke, not in a dramatic way, but with the painful clarity of realizing that Nathan truly believed the problem was only me, that if I went back to being quiet and accepted everything, things would be fine. I didn't say anything else. I just went back to the bedroom to get ready for work. I got in the car, drove to the veterinary clinic, and went in through the back, as always. My coworker Alyssa was in the break room making coffee, and the moment she saw me, she asked if everything was okay at home. I was about to give my usual answer, but my eyes filled with tears. Alyssa dropped her cup, grabbed me by the arm, and pulled me into the supply room. As soon as she closed the door, I started crying in that ugly, breathless way, with tears and mucus running down my face. I told her everything. The tomato sauce, Nathan throwing things, pouring out my shampoo, soaking the bed sheets, my own increasingly explosive reactions, yesterday's pots, the punch in the wall, his mother invading the house. She listened in silence without interrupting. When I finally stopped talking and wiped my tears with a paper towel, Alyssa took a deep breath and gently told me that all of this sounded like an abusive relationship. I tried to argue back. I said Nathan had never laid a hand on me, but she just raised her hand and asked me to listen. She said abuse isn't only physical, that destroying things, controlling behavior, and creating an atmosphere of fear is abuse too. She said that even me fighting back didn't make it any less serious, and that two people destroying each other isn't love, It's self-destruction on both sides. Then she asked me, in a simple and direct way, if that was really how I wanted to live the rest of my life. I stood there in the supply room, surrounded by boxes of medical supplies and bags of dog food, and realized that I genuinely didn't know how to answer. The rest of my shift passed, and I did everything on autopilot, my head spinning and replaying what Alyssa had said about mutual destruction. While examining a beagle's ears for mites, I remembered Nathan punching the wall. While vaccinating a cat, I thought about myself throwing pots in the middle of his work meeting. I cleaned the rooms, thinking about how we had both become people I no longer recognized. When I finally went home that night, I stood in the garage for over 10 minutes, staring at our townhouse. The kitchen light was on, and I could see Nathan moving around inside. Part of me wanted to just put the car in gear and disappear forever. But I got out of the car and went to the door, knowing that running away wouldn't solve anything. I walked into the house and stopped in the entryway, half in shock. The table was set with our nicest plates and cloth napkins, the ones that only came out when we had guests. There were candles lit in the center, and on the counter were takeout containers from my favorite Thai restaurant. The smell of pad Thai and green curry filled the place. Nathan appeared in the kitchen doorway, smiling that forced smile again, almost as if nothing had happened. He asked if I was hungry and made a proud little gesture, trying to play the romantic. I stood there, purse in hand, looking at everything. It was so obvious what he was trying to do. I bet it was his mother who taught him this trick, just like when his father used to break plates and then show up the next day with flowers. It was the big, pretty gesture meant to pretend nothing bad had happened, trying to cover everything up with special food and candles instead of actually talking about what mattered. I walked right past him and went to change clothes, leaving Nathan alone in the kitchen. When I came back, he was sitting at the table in that stiff posture, the fake smile glued to his face. I sat across from him, and immediately he started filling my plate with pad Thai, arranging the food as if everything were perfect. I looked at him while he did it and felt nothing. No anger, no hope, no sadness, just emptiness, as if I were watching a stranger perform in a play I had already seen too many times. I set my fork down on the table before even tasting the food and said, very directly, that we needed couples therapy. I said our marriage was falling apart and that only a professional could help. Nathan even laughed, not cruelly, but with the mockery of someone who thought it was a joke. He said therapy was for people with serious problems like addiction or cheating, and that what we really needed was to stop the drama and go back to normal. I asked what normal meant to him, and he said it meant me not making a scene when he got irritated and him not having to walk on eggshells in his own house. I pointed out that the day before he had punched a hole in the wall, and that this wasn't just frustration, it was violence. He rolled his eyes and said I was exaggerating, that plenty of men punch walls when they're angry and that it doesn't mean anything. I looked at him there, separated by the set table, the expensive food getting cold, and realized that he truly believed that. To him, breaking my things, soaking our bedding in the bathtub, or punching a wall was just part of life, something I was supposed to accept. Dinner wasn't an apology. It was just an attempt to buy my return to the role of the quiet, easy wife. I stood up firmly and said again that I was serious about therapy. Nathan said he wasn't going to waste money on a psychologist just so someone could take my side. I went to the bedroom, closed the door, and left Nathan there, eating Thai food alone. The next day, I woke up hearing his voice through the wall. He was in the office, talking so loudly that I could hear everything from the bedroom. I got up and stood close to the wall to listen better. Nathan was on the phone with his boss, using that cheerful, forced tone that always irritated me. He talked about construction next door that had made noise the day before, apologized for the chaos during the meeting, and promised it wouldn't happen again. There was a pause. His boss must have been responding. Then his voice grew more tense as he explained that the construction had been unexpected, and that he had already complained to building management. Another pause. He said he understood the client's situation, and that he took responsibility for not warning them about the risk of noise. The more he talked, the clearer it became that his boss wasn't buying the construction story. Nathan started calling half the world in sequence, trying to patch things up. I got ready while listening to him give 1,000 explanations about working from home, swearing to Winston that the quality of his work wouldn't drop. Then he called a coworker and asked him to talk to the client who had been in the chaotic meeting. With every call, he sounded more desperate, and it hit me that his job might really be on the line because of me. Part of me felt bad, but another part remembered all the times he had derailed my life with his outbursts and never cared about the consequences for me. I was making coffee in the kitchen when I heard knocking at the door. I opened it and came face to face with the building manager, wearing that unfriendly expression. He said he had received complaints from neighbors about noise and yelling coming from our townhouse, and asked if he could take a look inside. I let him in because I didn't even know what to say. The manager walked around and immediately noticed the hole in the hallway wall. He stood there staring at it for a long time. Then he saw the crooked kitchen cabinet door, the hinge broken during one of our fights. He opened the cabinet and the door came off entirely in his hands. He set the broken door down on the counter and turned to me, asking directly if he needed to be worried about his property. I tried to answer, but nothing came out of my mouth. That's when Nathan came out of the office and I saw the manager's expression change immediately. He asked Nathan what was going on with all the noise and damage in the apartment. Right away, Nathan slipped into that friendly, polite persona that always made me sick. He smiled at the manager and assured him everything was under control. He said they were just a few minor incidents and that he would take care of everything himself over the weekend. He put his hand on my shoulder, as if we were the happiest couple in the world, and I had to stop myself from pulling away. The owner noticed Nathan's hand on me and then looked at me directly, asking if I felt safe in that house. I froze. Nathan tightened his grip on my shoulder. The owner stood there waiting for my answer, and I couldn't think of anything to say. If I said no, what would happen? Would he call the police? Would Nathan get even worse? But if I said yes, wouldn't I be lying? Did I really feel safe there anymore? In the end, all I managed to say was that everything was fine, in a voice so low I doubt he believed it. The owner looked at me suspiciously but didn't push. Nathan walked him to the door, continuing the good guy act, promising again that he would fix everything and that the noise wouldn't happen again. The owner handed him a written warning about the complaints and said that if it happened again, eviction proceedings would begin. Nathan took the paper with a forced smile that only truly disappeared once the door closed. When the owner left, Nathan completely changed. He turned to me and immediately started yelling, saying I had humiliated him, that now we looked like two rude people incapable of solving our own problems. He said that the landlord probably thought he was an abuser because of me. I replied that he himself had punched the wall the night before, and that the landlord had seen the mark. Nathan shot back that it was different, that I had provoked him by dropping the pots during his meeting. He said that if I hadn't started that, none of it would have happened. I told him he had been having those outbursts and breaking things long before I ever reacted. He snapped back that I twisted everything, made him look like a monster, when he was only reacting to my behavior. We kept throwing sharp remarks at each other in the hallway until I couldn't take it anymore and went to the guest bedroom, slamming the door behind me. That night, I decided I would sleep there. I had already brought a pillow and some blankets earlier. As I was lying down, I heard Nathan coming in. He barged in without saying anything, went straight to the bed, and started pulling the mattress off the frame. I asked what he was doing, and he replied, "If you want to sleep separately, you can stay on the floor or on the couch." He dragged the mattress down the hallway into his office, pushing furniture aside to make room. I was left alone, standing there, staring at the empty bed frame, feeling something inside me break in a way different from all the other times. It wasn't anger or that heated feeling of a fight. It was punishment, cold and calculated, just because I had tried to stand up for myself a little. I grabbed my pillow and went to the living room couch. I lay there in the dark, listening to Nathan moving around in the office, thinking about how we had ended up there. I remembered the supermarket, the pasta sauce, how that first outburst had already been a warning. I thought about all the times I had excused his behavior or tried to fix everything on my own instead of leaving right away. I remembered when I started fighting back, thinking he would realize how wrong he was. In the end, all I did was give him a reason to say I was unstable too. The next day at work, Anna came to talk to me in the break room because Alyssa had told her things were complicated at home. She asked if I wanted to stay at her place for a while. She said she had a spare room, that I could go there to think about my life and calmly decide what to do. I stood there holding my cold coffee, genuinely tempted to accept. It would be so easy to just pack a bag and disappear for a few days. But then I imagined Nathan getting comfortable, as if he had won something. Once again, it would be me who had to give in, give up my space, change my plans, while he carried on as if nothing had happened. I thanked Anna profusely, but said I wasn't going to leave my home. Nathan was the problem, and I was exhausted from always being the one who had to sacrifice, give in, or fix everything alone. Anna looked worried, but said she understood, and made me promise I would call her anytime if I needed to. I promised. I went back to work and spent the entire day thinking about that offer, a little ashamed of wanting to stay, but also without the courage to run away again or pretend everything was fine. When I got home, Nathan's office was locked. I could hear him typing and talking on the phone. I ate dinner alone in the kitchen, just me and my food, while he stayed shut in there. He didn't come out of the office even when I went to bed. The days started following this pattern. He spent hours locked in there. I went to work and came back. We barely saw each other. When we crossed paths in the hallway, we didn't exchange a single word. It felt like we were two strangers sharing the same roof, married only on paper. I woke up with him already in the office, came home from work, and he was still there, living in parallel routines. We stopped cooking together, stopped sharing stories about our day, stopped occupying the same space. All that remained were quick, uncomfortable encounters in the hallway, eyes avoiding each other. I realized he was avoiding me just as much as I was avoiding him. Neither of us knew how to fix the mess, and neither had the courage to be the first to try. That's how we began living in that icy silence, which felt even worse than the arguments and the screaming. One night like that, I had to perform emergency surgery on a cat that had ingested poison. By the time I finished, it was almost midnight. I came home exhausted, wanting nothing more than to collapse on the couch. I unlocked the door, stepped into the dark house, and when I turned on the kitchen light, I immediately noticed something was different. Now, in addition to the lock, Nathan's office door had one of those reinforced locks that only open with a key. I went over and tried to open it, but the handle didn't even move. Then I went to make something to eat, and noticed there was another new lock on the pantry door. I stood there staring at it, the pantry where we kept all the food in the house. Nathan came out of the office and I asked what he was up to. He said, Since you can't respect my work, I'm protecting my space and my food. I asked if he was really locking up our food, and he said it was his. After all, he had bought most of it. He said I could buy my own things and store them somewhere else. Then he simply went back into the office and locked the door with the new lock. I stood there in the kitchen, staring at the locked pantry for a long time after he went back to the office. I was starving because I had worked straight through lunch at the clinic, and now I couldn't even get my own food. I went out to the garage, grabbed my toolbox from the shelf, and went straight to Nathan's office door. I unscrewed the router from the wall, unplugged the modem too, and wrapped the cables around both devices. The door stayed closed the whole time. I carried everything to the car, put the router and modem in the trunk, locked it, and went back inside with the keys in my hand. About 20 minutes later, Nathan stormed out of the office, furious, complaining that the internet was down. I was sitting quietly on the couch, scrolling on my phone, and said the internet was fine. It was just in a safe place. He demanded to know where it was, and I said I'd only give it back if he unlocked the pantry. His face turned red instantly, and he started pacing back and forth in the living room. He grabbed his phone, turned on the hotspot, and connected his laptop. Then he looked at me with that smug expression, as if he had won something, and went back into the office. Since I still couldn't get real food, I ordered a pizza on my phone. The next morning, Nathan was already locked in the office when I left for work. I heard him on a video call talking about quarterly projections. When I came back that night, he was still there. But I noticed that from time to time he came out to check his phone, looked at the screen, muttered something, and went back into the office. This happened 3 more times before dinner. Around 8 p.m., he finally knocked on the living room wall to get my attention. I looked up from my phone and he asked where the router was. I reminded him of the lock on the pantry, but he insisted it was different because that food was his. I said that then the internet was mine, since I paid half the bill. He simply went back into the office and slammed the door. The next day, I arrived home and saw a package on the porch. Nathan must have been watching because he rushed to grab it before I even reached my keys. He went straight inside into the office, and soon I heard him tearing open the box. After a while, I tried to connect to our Wi-Fi, and the network was gone. In its place, there was a new one. Nathan's network, password protected. I tried several obvious passwords, but I couldn't get in. At lunch at work, I sat in the cafeteria watching videos on my phone, since I didn't have internet at home anymore. Alyssa came in to make coffee and noticed I wasn't using the clinic's Wi-Fi. She asked why. I told her about the whole separate internet situation at home. Alyssa stopped pouring the coffee, looked at me seriously, carefully set the coffee pot down, sat across from me at the table, and said quietly that what I was describing wasn't normal. She said I was smart, capable, and didn't need to live like that. I told her I knew it wasn't normal, but that I wasn't going to let Nathan walk all over me. Alyssa took my hand and said that entering the same game wouldn't make me stronger. It would only make me participate in something that was destroying me. I pulled my hand away and said I needed to get back to work. I spent the rest of the day avoiding Alyssa, because I didn't want to hear anything else, even though I knew she was right. Nathan started missing deadlines at work. I could hear him having stressful arguments with his boss through the door. One afternoon, he spent more than an hour promising he would deliver everything by the end of the day. Later, the office door flew open, and Nathan appeared completely unhinged. He said Winston had called him in for a serious talk about performance, and that now his boss was threatening to put him on a performance improvement plan. Nathan stood in the hallway and shouted that everything was my fault, because I was difficult, and made the atmosphere at home so tense that he couldn't focus on anything. I was sitting on the couch and replied that no one told him to spend so much time on petty vendettas instead of actually working. He grabbed a folder near the door and threw it across the room. The folder hit the wall right next to the hole that was already there, and caused even more damage to the drywall. It fell to the floor, scattering papers everywhere. 10 minutes later, I heard a knock at the door. Nathan and I froze, staring at each other. I was the one who got up to answer. It was the landlord, clipboard in hand, with a very unfriendly expression. He said the neighbors were complaining about the noise and that this was the last warning. He handed me an official notice. The notice said that if there was any more damage or disturbance, we would be evicted. He asked both of us to sign to confirm receipt. Nathan came to the door and we signed together. The landlord commented that he had owned that townhouse for 15 years and had never had problems until we moved in. He looked at us firmly and said that whatever was going on needed to stop, or we would have to leave. Then he simply went back to his car and drove away. Nathan went back to his office without saying a word. I stayed there on the couch, staring at the 2 holes in the wall, the floor covered in papers, just thinking. Locked pantry, each of us with our own internet, unable to even stay in the same room together. I grabbed my keys, went to the car, and sat there in the garage with the engine off, just staring at the house. Time passed and I couldn't force myself to go back inside. It felt like living in a battlefield, always exhausted. I was never afraid that Nathan would physically hurt me, because he never had, but the environment was suffocating. Every day felt like crossing a war zone. I sat there with my phone in my hand, not knowing who to call or what to say. In the end, I called Elle. It was already almost 9 p.m., and I was still sitting in the car with the engine off. She answered quickly, on the second ring, and I could hear the TV in the background. I told her everything. The landlord's warning, the separate internets, the Cold War atmosphere inside the house between Nathan and me. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she just said that if I wanted, I could stay at her place. The couch was always available. She was silent for a moment and suggested that maybe it was time to look for a lawyer, just to understand my options. I thanked her and hung up. I spent another 20 minutes staring at my phone before I managed to go back inside. The next day, during lunch at the clinic, I started looking up divorce lawyers. I kept repeating to myself that it was just to understand how it worked, not because I was really thinking about separating. I found the contact for Patricia Chen, well-reviewed and with availability that week. I scheduled a consultation for Thursday afternoon and didn't tell Nathan anything. When the day came, I left work early and went to her office in a building downtown. The waiting room was uncomfortable, full of bad chairs and old magazines. Patricia called me in after about 10 minutes. We sat in a large office with a big window facing the parking lot, and she asked me to tell her about the marriage. I explained the basics, Nathan's outbursts, my reactions. She wrote everything down on a yellow legal pad and asked if he had ever physically hurt me. I said no, that it had never reached that point. Then she asked about emotional abuse, and I froze, not knowing how to answer. Patricia set the pen down and explained that destroying things, controlling behavior, and creating a hostile environment are also abuse, even without physical aggression. She said that everything I described fit a pattern she had seen many times. She handed me some pamphlets about domestic violence, explained the available support resources, and advised me to think carefully about whether it made sense to try to save the marriage, or whether I needed to protect myself and leave. I took the pamphlets, put them in my bag, and went home feeling dazed, turning the word abuse over in my head and wondering if it really applied to my story. As soon as I walked into the duplex, I was confronted by a strange man working in the kitchen. He was high up on a ladder, patching the hole in the wall that Nathan had made, with tools spread across the counter. Nathan appeared as soon as he heard the door and explained curtly that he had called a handyman to fix everything before the landlord came back. The handyman barely looked at us, but you could feel the discomfort in the air. He probably sensed the tension between Nathan and me. I went straight to the bedroom without saying a word and locked the door. Later that night, after the handyman was gone, Nathan ran into me in the kitchen while I was making dinner. He spoke to me with a cold, formal tone, telling me he was fixing everything so we wouldn't get evicted, as if I were just a coworker, not his wife. Only then did I realize it had been more than a week since we'd really talked, just quick exchanges about daily tasks. He asked what time I would get home the next day. I said the usual time. He just nodded and went back to his office. I ate dinner alone, staring at the newly repaired wall. The next day, Alyssa came to talk to me in the supply room and asked how things were at home. I tried to play it off, but she saw the exhaustion and tension on my face. She said she was worried. I ended up confessing that Nathan and I didn't really talk anymore, and were just living like two hostile roommates. She commented that even if Nathan didn't want couples therapy, I at least needed to talk to someone, because it was obvious the situation was taking a toll on me. She showed me the website of a psychologist, Reed Molina, who specialized in relationships and trauma. I took a picture of the profile on her phone and promised I'd think about it. That same day, I called the clinic and scheduled an appointment for the following Tuesday. The receptionist asked what I wanted to address. I said relationship problems, thinking it sounded too small compared to everything I felt. When Tuesday came, I left work at 4 and went to the office. On the other side of the city, Reed herself came to greet me. A woman in her early 50s, gray hair, a warm demeanor. The office was softly lit, with a comfortable armchair and a box of tissues nearby. She began by asking what had brought me there, so I poured everything out. Nathan's crises, my reactions, everything that had happened in the past few months. Saying it all out loud to someone from the outside made me realize how far our life had drifted from normal. Reed asked what I expected from therapy, and when it was time to say that I wanted to save the marriage, I couldn't even get the words out. I stayed quiet, staring at the tissues, not even sure what I wanted. Reed didn't force an answer. She preferred to explore with me Nathan's behavioral patterns and the ways I reacted. She explained that it was the classic cycle of abuse, even without physical violence, and said that my reactions were trauma responses to feeling trapped in my own home. Then she said something that kept echoing in my head, that fighting back in the same way only pulled me deeper into that dynamic. It didn't give any power back. I left the session feeling like everything was upside down, like I no longer knew what was real in our story. I kept going to Reed twice a week after that first time. Session after session, things started to become clearer. I was so focused on not being taken advantage of that I had stopped asking myself whether this relationship was even worth keeping. Nathan stayed the same despite my attempts to fight back on equal footing. He only became more careful, locking the pantry and setting up separate internet networks for me. I couldn't stand living on permanent alert inside my own home anymore. Reed helped me see that no one deserves to live in a battlefield, regardless of whether they stay with their partner or not. After 3 weeks of therapy, Nathan's mother called me, something she hadn't done in a long time. I was sitting in my car outside the clinic after work when her name appeared on the screen. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Laura didn't even say hello. She went straight to saying that Nathan had told her I was in therapy. Her voice carried that judgmental tone when she said therapists only serve to break families apart. I pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at it for a moment. Then I put it back and calmly said I needed to hang up. She was still talking when I ended the call. I called back and told her that her son had learned how to make scenes somewhere, and that maybe it was time for her to reflect on her own role in all of this. Even with my heart racing, my voice came out steady and firm. Laura made an indignant noise, as if she could hardly believe what she had heard. She started lecturing about respect and family, but I simply hung up and dropped the phone on the passenger seat. My hands were still shaking, but I felt a sense of relief for finally having said what needed to be said. An hour later, Nathan sent me a message complaining about how I had dared to speak to his mother that way and demanding an apology. I didn't reply, because nothing I said would change anything. When I got home, Nathan was already waiting for me in the living room with his arms crossed. As soon as I opened the door, he started yelling that I had disrespected his mother and humiliated him. I let my bag fall to the floor and yelled back in the same tone, saying that he had always been spoiled by his mother, that she had spent his whole life excusing him and letting everything slide, no matter how absurd it was. Nathan's face turned red with rage and he shouted, "You've become someone I don't even recognize." I shot back, "I'm just giving back the same thing you've brought into this marriage since day one." We stood there in the middle of the living room, finally screaming at each other after weeks of a cold war that had already become routine. Nathan said, "You used to be sweet, easy to deal with. Now you're always scowling." I replied, "And I'm like this because you turned our home into a place where I have to be on guard all the time." He snapped back, "Everything was fine until you started freaking out." I said, "It was never fine. I was just too afraid to stand up for myself." Nathan froze immediately, as if his whole body deflated. He leaned against the wall and slid down until he was sitting on the floor, hugging his legs. He buried his face in his hands and said in a low, tired voice, no longer angry, "I have no idea how we got to this point." He said he didn't know how to fix it, and that this was the first truly honest thing he'd said in a long time. I stood there looking at him and realized I was exhausted too. All the anger I felt gave way to emptiness, to sadness. I sat down on the floor on the other side of the room, my back against the wall. We stayed there in silence, just looking at each other, the house quiet, with only the hum of the refrigerator in the background. I said, "I don't know if our marriage can still be saved." He lifted his head, eyes red. I continued, "I only know that we can't keep going like this, because we're destroying each other." Nathan nodded, wiping his face with the sleeve of his shirt. Then he started talking in a very soft voice about his father, about seeing him throwing things and yelling at his mother. He said his father would break plates whenever he got angry, and his mother would just clean everything up as if nothing had happened. Nathan said, "I grew up thinking that was normal, that men are just like that." He lowered his eyes and admitted, "I have an anger problem." He said he didn't want to be like his father, but didn't know how to be different, because he had never seen another example. When he said he was afraid, he was already exactly like his father. His voice broke. I thought about everything I had been hearing in my sessions with Reed. I told Nathan, "Look, I'm willing to try couples therapy, but only if you show in practice that you want to change. Promises have already become routine, and I need action, not speeches." He looked at me and asked, "Do you really think therapy can help?" I just replied, "I don't know, but I'm sure we can't do this on our own." He nodded and said he would look for a couples therapist and schedule an appointment. For the first time in weeks, I felt a thin thread of hope that maybe, just maybe, things could be fixed. Nathan picked up his phone while still sitting on the floor and started searching for therapists, reading reviews out loud. He found a well-reviewed professional who specialized in couples counseling and anger management, and called the office, leaving a message to schedule as soon as possible. 3 days later, they called back saying there was an opening for Thursday. He confirmed and told me as soon as I got home from work. On the day of the appointment, we got ready without speaking. We each went in our own car because I wanted an escape route in case I needed to leave. The waiting room was all beige, with comfortable armchairs and magazines on the table. We sat side by side, each lost in our own phone, avoiding looking at each other, counting the minutes until we were called. A woman appeared and called us in, introduced herself as the therapist, and led us to her office. The first session was heavy because we both let out everything that had been bottled up for months. I talked about Nathan's anger outbursts, the broken objects, the constant fear inside my own home. He said I had changed, become aggressive, and that he felt like nothing he did was ever enough for me. The therapist listened to everything in silence. In the end, she didn't take sides. She just said, "You've entered a cycle of retaliation that will end up destroying both of you." She explained that one provokes the other to respond even worse, and that no one wins that way. Nathan and I sat there digesting it all. She gave us an assignment: practice respectful communication, the very basics. She said, "For the next week, no aggression, neither toward each other nor toward objects in the house." We both agreed to try. You could tell Nathan was skeptical that just talking would change anything, but he promised to follow it. The first week was an absurd challenge. Our pattern was exactly the opposite, and we had to police ourselves constantly not to slip. One morning, Nathan went to slam the door, but caught himself at the last second and closed it gently. I saw him making that effort, taking a deep breath. Another day, I started to make a sharp comment because he left the sink full of dishes, but I stopped myself before finishing. We were both really trying, but it felt mechanical. Strange. It felt like we were speaking a language that wasn't ours. One night at dinner, Nathan spoke in a very formal way, his voice stiff, and it felt so forced that I only said thank you when he passed me the pepper. After so long without us saying please or thank you in some moments, it felt almost unreal. A few times we almost fell back into old habits, but we managed to hold ourselves back. After the second week following the therapist's guidance, things started to feel a little less heavy. There was a Tuesday when Nathan woke up early, and when I got to the kitchen, he was already there, dressed, with coffee ready for both of us, without me asking for anything. My mug was on the counter, steaming, and he just pointed to it when I walked in. I picked it up and took a sip. It was exactly the way I like it, with the cream just right. We barely exchanged words, but we sat together at the kitchen table for about 10 minutes before he left for work. After everything, it felt strange, but also like a relief. A few days later, coming back from a shift, I decided to stop by his favorite Thai restaurant and bought pad Thai as a surprise. I just brought it home and left it on the desk in the home office while he was still on the phone. He looked surprised, moved his lips as if whispering a thank you, but didn't even need to say it. These small gestures of kindness between us were delicate. It felt like any misstep could ruin everything. We moved around each other at home with extreme care, in that somewhat artificial politeness that we knew we needed. Nathan would ask if I wanted anything from the grocery store before leaving. I would text if I was going to be late, just so he wouldn't worry. We were trying to build something new, but it was all so fragile that neither of us could truly trust it yet. One afternoon, Nathan came home from work with a genuine smile, something that hadn't happened in months. He found me in the living room folding laundry and came to tell me that his boss had called him in to talk that morning. Winston had noticed that Nathan's work had improved and that his attitude was different. Nathan told me proudly that Winston had even said it seemed like his personal problems were being resolved. He said he was meeting deadlines again and that client presentations were going well. You could see how important that was to him, because he had been afraid of losing his boss's trust. He sat down on the couch next to the laundry basket and, for the first time, truly smiled. He said he felt like life was getting back on track, and that this was only happening because both of us were making an effort. I told him sincerely that I was happy for him, especially because his boss had noticed. Seeing Nathan care about things other than our fights reminded me of the man I married before everything fell apart. The following week, during dinner, Nathan's phone rang and his mother's name, Lorraine, appeared on the screen. My stomach dropped because calls from her are almost always synonymous with trouble. Nathan looked at the phone, then at me, and answered right there at the table. I thought he would go to the office, like he usually did, but he stayed. Laura's voice came through loud and demanding on speakerphone. Nathan took a deep breath and said he needed to talk about something important. He told her that we were working on our marriage, going to therapy, and that things were moving forward. She immediately started interrupting, asking what kind of therapy it was, and saying that couples therapy only creates problems. For the first time, Nathan cut his mother off and said that she needed to support what we were doing, or else he would prefer that she step away entirely. Laura raised her voice and began listing everything she thought I did wrong, but Nathan stood firm and said he wouldn't discuss that, and that she needed to respect his boundaries. There was silence on the other end until Laura replied, "Fine," coldly, and hung up. Nathan put his phone face down on the table and went back to eating. I stood there, stunned, because he had never stood up to his mother for my sake before. He didn't look at me or comment on it, but I could tell how difficult that had been for him. 2 weeks later, I asked Nathan to pick up my medication at the pharmacy when he passed by the cafe. He said he would, and for me, the matter was settled. But when he got home that night, he brought only the coffee. He had forgotten the medication. I got irritated right away and asked where it was. He looked confused and said he had simply forgotten and could go back to get it. Almost immediately, I thought it had been on purpose, just to provoke me, because it seemed like he always forgot whenever I asked him for something. I said that out loud. His expression changed. He said he really had forgotten and apologized. I didn't want to believe him and was already bracing for a fight. Nathan then suggested calling the therapist, since this was exactly the kind of situation she had warned us about. I didn't want to. I was too angry. But Nathan took his phone and sent her a message asking if she could see us on an emergency basis. She replied in less than an hour, saying she could see us the next morning. We barely spoke that night. I hardly slept, convinced he had done it on purpose. The next day, we went to the office, and I told the therapist what had happened. She listened and then asked why I was so sure he had forgotten on purpose. I said it was because it had always been like that before. She reminded me that Nathan had been following through for weeks, and that a single slip didn't remotely mean everything had gone back to how it was before. She asked him directly if he had done it on purpose, and he explained that he hadn't. He had been distracted by a work issue and simply forgot. The therapist explained that in rebuilding trust, mistakes would still happen, but that we needed to give each other space without always expecting the worst. She said I was still on the defensive, waiting for a reason to fight, and that Nathan was still afraid of my reaction. We discussed all of this for the entire session, and by the end I was almost embarrassed at how I had lost my temper over the medication. After 3 months of therapy, Nathan and I had more good days than bad. Relapses still happened, but we noticed them quickly. Nathan was learning to say when he was frustrated instead of taking it out on everything around him. There was a day when he got annoyed because I had used up the coffee creamer, but instead of throwing a fit, He just said he was upset and went to the store to buy more. I, in turn, was learning to set real boundaries without exploding. When Nathan forgot and left a wet towel in the bathroom, I told him it bothered me instead of throwing his things away. We were both working hard. It still felt like a constant effort, but at least now we were walking together. Our therapist always said that change takes time and that there's no magic way to erase months of bad habits overnight. Nathan had learned to express himself better, and I no longer reacted the way I used to. We still argued from time to time, but the fights were no longer charged with destruction. We started actually talking about our problems, slowly and awkwardly at first, but it ended up working. I realized I was no longer waiting for Nathan to lose his temper at any moment. And he noticed that I wasn't constantly looking for reasons to argue anymore. We were building something more stable, different from what it once was, but much more solid. The lease was almost up, and we didn't know whether the landlord would allow us to stay, especially since he had already given us that formal warning about damage and noise complaints. Nathan called to ask about the renewal, and the owner showed up the next day to inspect the house, walking through every room, checking walls, floors, and cabinets. Nathan had patched the holes in the walls and replaced the cabinet hinges, so everything was clean and in order. The landlord seemed surprised and commented that there hadn't been any complaints from the neighbors for months, that everything had been quiet. Nathan explained that we had managed to work things out and that things were much better now. The landlord looked at both of us and said he was relieved we had sorted things out because he had been ready to start the eviction process. He said it was good to have responsible tenants and agreed to renew the lease for another year, hoping everything would remain peaceful. When he left, Nathan and I looked at each other, flooded with relief. It felt like confirmation that we really were changing, not just pretending. At lunch with Alyssa at the diner near the clinic, she asked how therapy was going. I told her how much Nathan and I had evolved over those months, and she listened carefully before saying how proud she was of my effort to fix things. She commented that she felt like I was becoming myself again, not that stressed, irritable version from before. That echoed in my head, and I realized she was right. I wasn't walking on eggshells anymore, or operating in combat mode, waiting for the next fight. Alyssa said you could see it even in how I was at work and in the lightness with which I talked about life. She said I smiled more and seemed much calmer. I hadn't even noticed the change, but hearing it from her made me see how much better I was. The weight of living in a battlefield was gone. There was still a lot to work on in therapy, but I no longer felt that desperate sense that everything could collapse at any moment. Spring arrived, and the garden in the backyard that I had planted the year before was completely overrun with weeds. Months had gone by without me tending it. Such was the stress and irritation. I had almost forgotten about tomatoes or peppers. One Saturday morning, Nathan found me looking at the yard through the kitchen window and suggested, "This year we could plant together, since taking care of it alone became too heavy for you." I was surprised. He had never been interested in gardening. We spent the afternoon pulling weeds and turning the soil. Nathan asked, "What do you want to plant this year?" And I listed the vegetables I had grown before. We went together to the garden center to buy seedlings, him carrying the heavy bags, me planning the layout. We worked side by side, digging holes and placing the plants. Nathan got completely dirty with soil and didn't complain. We watered everything together and then stood there looking at the result. It finally felt like everything was returning to normal. It was just the two of us working on a project together in the backyard. No tension, no resentment. In the following weeks, we continued taking care of the garden, and it felt good to share that responsibility. Our therapist scheduled the next session saying she wanted to talk about our progress. She praised us. "You've improved a lot in communication and conflict resolution." She reminded us that before, nothing was resolved. There was only destruction everywhere, and now we were finally facing problems. But she warned us to stay alert to old patterns, especially during stressful times. She reinforced that the tools we had learned only work if we keep practicing them. For that reason, she recommended monthly therapy as maintenance instead of stopping altogether. Many couples abandon therapy once the bad phase passes and end up falling into the same mistakes as soon as a new problem appears, she explained. Nathan and I agreed to continue with the sessions. We had worked too hard to let everything collapse. Before ending, the therapist said, "I'm very proud of both of you for the effort to change. Growth is ongoing, so celebrate the progress, but never stop taking care of the relationship." Nathan's mother called, saying she wanted to visit the following weekend. He asked if I felt comfortable, and I said yes, despite the knot in my stomach. Laura arrived on a Saturday afternoon, and I was already expecting that heavy atmosphere, full of judgment, but she sat at the table, looked seriously at both of us, and said, "I want to apologize for minimizing the problems in your marriage and for enabling Nathan's behavior." I was stunned. I had never seen her apologize before. She continued, "Seeing Nathan almost lose his marriage made me reflect on my own relationship and on the patterns I ended up passing on to him. Nathan's father treated me the same way, and I pretended it was normal, saying that boys are just like that. Only now do I understand that I taught Nathan that all of this was acceptable, and it wasn't." Laura looked at her son and said, "I'm sorry for not holding you accountable." Then she turned to me. "Please forgive me for making you feel like his mistakes were your fault." I could only nod my head, unable to find the words. Nathan reached out and squeezed her hand. Laura stayed for dinner, and that meeting was completely different from all the previous ones. This time, she truly tried to be warm and welcoming, with no criticism. After she left, Nathan and I sat on the couch and he said, "I never imagined my mother would admit she was wrong about anything." I replied, "For me, it means a lot to see her acknowledge her own role in all of this." We both felt that maybe things really were changing for the better. 6 months after that episode with the pans, Nathan and I are doing much better. Even though we know there will always be things to work through, we've learned to take care of each other before falling into the same old mistakes. Now we can talk about what's bothering us instead of just letting everything fall apart. Just last week, Nathan got irritated about something at work, and I noticed when he clenched his fists, but he managed to hold himself back. He took a deep breath 3 times, just like our therapist taught him, and said, "I need about 10 minutes alone." I agreed right away and went to take care of the tomatoes in the backyard. When he came back, he apologized for needing his time and was finally able to explain clearly what had been bothering him. These moments still feel fragile, kind of new, but they're already more frequent than the bad days. Just yesterday, we argued about who was going to clean the bathroom, and Nathan ended up getting worked up. I felt like yelling back the way I used to, but instead I said, "I think it's better if we pause this conversation." Each of us took about 20 minutes to cool down, and when things settled, we came back and managed to talk calmly. The bathroom got cleaned, and no one had to slam doors or break anything. I continue doing individual therapy with Heidi because I realize that my personal work goes far beyond issues within the marriage. She helps me understand why I stayed so long without asserting myself and how to maintain my boundaries in a healthy way. In the last session, she asked, "What did you gain by engaging in Nathan's outbursts?" I had to think about it for quite a while. I told her that deep down, it made me feel strong, after so many months feeling powerless and invisible. Then Heidi said, "True power lies in choosing how to react, not in trying to prove that you can be destructive too." That hit me hard because it was absolutely true. I was so worried about not being the victim that I ended up becoming someone I didn't even recognize anymore. Every week, Heidi gives me exercises to identify my patterns and triggers. This week, I need to pay attention to when I get defensive and ask myself whether I really need to protect myself in that moment, or if I'm just reacting to old fears. Nathan also started therapy to deal with his anger, which goes beyond our marriage. He told me that his therapist is helping him understand how his childhood shaped the way he reacts, and that he's truly determined to break that cycle. Last Thursday, he came back from a session and said, "I had an insight about watching my father destroy things when he got angry," and explained, "I learned that breaking things was how a man dealt with frustration, because that's what I saw my whole life." The therapist is showing me other ways to deal with anger that don't involve destroying anything or trying to control everything. You can see how much effort he's making, and that means everything to me. We're not perfect, and there are still days when things feel heavy. But today we have something very different from what we once had. We have a relationship based on real conversation, not fear or excess. I feel a genuine sense of hope about our future together, in a way I never imagined I'd feel 6 months ago, when I was throwing pans on the kitchen floor. And that's it, in the end. Nothing too elaborate, just a vent to organize my thoughts. If this helps someone even just a little, that already makes me happy.